the federal government reviewed the salaries and allowances of public officers and political office holders on 4 occasions, specifically in 2000, 2005, 2007, and 2011. New regimes of national minimum wage were also put in place within the same period. However, the salaries of judicial officers were only reviewed twice during the same period. The present day but sad reality is that the judiciary has stagnated on the same salary scale for over 16 years. This is totally unacceptable and is quite antithetical to any meaningful judicial reform.
That is the Attorney General of the Federation. In other part of town today, there is an effort in reviewing the judgment of relating to the 2023 general elections. And so there are law experts, civil society organization, and some judges who are sitting today and looking at the issues that are raised in relation to that election and some of the judgments that have come to it. So let me allow you to listen to some of the organizers and, in fact, some of the heads of courts today at that event.
We know that when the electoral umpire fails, the judiciary is well placed to be able to correct what has failed. And I think it's important that the judiciary continues to play that role to be able to ensure that citizens' confidence in elections, citizens' confidence in democracy remains very much intact. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done going forward.
We have been treated to an unpalatable cocktail of misleadings and conflicting judgments, as well as frivolous interlocutory orders emanating from courts of coordinate jurisdictions, which attempt to make a mockery of our judicial system. This is largely an embarrassment to our jurisprudence, and we will not take it lying low at all. Punitive measures must be taken against such erring judges. Any judicial officer who conducts himself in a manner that is considered unbecoming of a judicial officer will not only be shown the way out, but will equally be made to face the consequences of his actions. There will never be room for any sacred cow in the judiciary, because our image and reputation deserve more crystallization and embellishment than what we are currently getting.
Is it coincidence that on the same day there is advocacy on a monument for judicial officers? So you heard what the CJN is saying, the habits, the conduct of judges. Don't forget what happened on Friday. NJC came down hard on some judges. In fact, they've barred the elevation of 2 of them. What does this mean for our judiciary? Let me allow a former chairman of the Nigerian Human Rights Commission and Professor Odinkalu joins us virtually. Thank you so much, Prof, for joining us tonight. How does this come to you when you heard agitation? In fact, for so long a time, 16 plus years, that the salaries and emoluments of judges or judicial officers have not been reviewed. Is it a sad tale that could have been a major problem that we're seeing in our judiciary?
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Sean. Good evening. I hope you are good to begin with.
Thank you so much. I am.
In this season of eternal hope, I think we need to be asking after one another's well-being. Look, first of all, I think it is a positive thing that the remuneration of judicial officers is being reviewed. But I think it's also important to say a few things beyond that. You can see that the hearing is not just about the remuneration of judges. It is the remuneration in the judiciary. The judiciary, of course, judges work in the judiciary, but the judiciary is more than just judges. It also involves judiciary workers. And in respect of that, you have JUSUN, the Judiciary Staff Union of Nigeria, which brings together all the workers in the judiciary. Now, you can hear from what the Honorable Attorney General of the Federation said, that the last time the salaries of judiciary workers was reviewed, by his own claims, I'm granting him every claim he made, by his own claims, was 2011. The last time the judicial salaries were reviewed was 2008. That's not a lot of difference. That was under the Jonathan Yaradua administration. All right? So, what exactly is the justification and what do we hope to achieve? If we grant judges over 800% increase in salaries and do not think we should expedite the review of the salaries of judiciary workers, my sense is if I were a judiciary worker, I'll be very resentful. And there'll be two things. It's either I down tools, I'll start collecting bribes extraordinarily. It's one of those two. And I think that is exactly where we are. And I think we've got to understand that that is the reality today.
So, I mean, for a lot of our viewers who are perhaps not familiar with the happenings in the courtrooms, so it is not only those who are sitting right on the bench that work within the judiciary. Of course, those who are sitting on this other side are called members of lawyers and members of the bar, and those on the other side are members of the bench. Of course, those who apply the laws and also those who now give judgments. Now, they work with several other people who are staff within the courts. And these are some of them that Professor Odinkalu is referring to. Those who are not judges, but also work within our courtrooms. They are helping the judges to advance the cause of justice. But then, how bad is the situation in your mind, Prof? If you understand what goes on in other climes, do you think that there has been an impact on the treatment or the welfare of those who work in the judiciary on our justice system?
No, absolutely, yes. I mean, how many times have the Judiciary Staff Union gone on strike just in the past 3 years alone? In some states, courts have been more closed than open as a result of the fact that Judiciary Staff Union personnel who run the courts, without them, the courts cannot function. Look, so when you go to court, you've got a registry, and the registry has the personnel who run the records, who help with filing. Judges are not going to do filing. They're not going to do service. That's the business of the bailiffs. They're not going to do the documentation. They're not they're not going to process the receipts that prove that you have paid the filing fees and all of that. All of those things precede the performative parts of the judicial function, which is really when you show up in front of a judge and then somebody brings the file and says, case number, this, that, the other one, and calls the parties and verifies that the parties are there. And then the judge will ask a report of service, and the person says service has been done, the parties are all notified. All of that needs to take place before a case can be had. When those things have not been done, you can't have any case. My fear is that judges are so fixated on themselves that they forget that their output is contingent, actually, on the well-being of those personnel. And you know, it's a very Nigerian thing. Big men and big women don't remember that the poor people matter, and that without the poor people, they can actually not enjoy the perquisites of being big. And this is just being replicated, it seems to me, in this whole thing. The dignity of the judicial staff, I've not heard about in all of this. It's about judges and the big men and big women that they supposedly are. And that, I fear, ultimately is going to be counterproductive and will leave us in a situation where the courts may not function because of industrial resentments or a default to large-scale corruption by judicial staff. Subsistence corruption, but corruption nevertheless.
Let me ask you, what should be the standard? Now, we're discussing minimum wage, and there are agitations on the minimum pay that any worker should get in Nigeria. And I'd like to ask you, What should be the standard? You heard what the Attorney General is saying. You heard what the CJN is saying about the welfare of judges. For a judge to be independent and not look at what those who come before him or her will do to subvert the will of justice. What standards should we be setting to make sure that the judges are above board and such that their welfare is enough to take care of them and they are not begging or running after politicians or running after those with the money bags and those who can buy judgments?
You see, we've ended up in a situation that is untenable, quite honestly. You cannot just single out judges because they are not the only people in the system. By singling out judges, we ensure that this thing will not be sustainable. Now, we pay politicians peanuts and expect them to run trillion naira budgets, okay? We don't pay police officers at all, and we expect them to protect these judges whom we are now going to be paying squillions. We don't pay judiciary workers, and we expect them to make these judges who are very comfortable function. Look, just as a basic proposition, our Constitution prohibits status discrimination. Status discrimination is treating a judge differently or prioritizing a judge's labor differently from how you prioritize the labor of a worker in the same judicial system who is not a judge. And many of them are lawyers. Many of them are graduates in other fields: accounting, auditing, finance, administration, and law, of course, and you name it. And of course, law enforcement. How do we justify the fact that we are picking? So the president earns peanuts, all right? Governors earn less than peanuts. Senators earn less than peanuts. Are their jobs not as important? Are they not as high up in our priorities, our social priorities? Why do we think that everything has to start from judicial dispute resolution when administrative process is not functioning? Because when the administrative process functions, one, you reduce the load on the judiciary itself. Number two, you reduce the need for judges to be sitting every time, and the caseload they have, therefore, is reduced. Number three, you also make the judicial system more efficient. So, administrative justice is important. The political system and its functionality is very critical, but we don't want to prioritize those, nor do we want to prioritize the lower down. We are just picking up judges. And if you ask me, this is settlement. This is politicians settling the people through whom they now control the political system. And they realize that the people no longer matter. Our votes no longer matter. And therefore, they can casualize the people in this conversation. That is what, in my view, is being reflected here. That the legitimacy, the mandate of politicians is increasingly residing in the hands of judiciary or judges, and therefore those are the people whom they are prioritizing. This is judges and politicians involved in a quid pro quo that casualizes the people. We have to be careful about this.
So, I mean, what in terms of payment, in terms of pay structure, how much or what is the standard do you, in your mind, would you suppose that the judiciary should be getting compared to what goes on in other crimes? To make them live above board?
No, I cannot be comparing what goes on in other crimes, surely, because of the nature of the perversions, the perverse incentives that now dominate our judicial system. You heard the Chief Justice of the Federation, the outgoing, he's just served his notice of retirement. And he was talking about, he's confessing that the system is not working. He's confessing by himself that a lot of his peers on the judiciary are destroying the credibility of the system. But under his watch as Chief Justice, the disciplinary system has collapsed. He lacks the authority to discipline anybody. And I will tell you why. He spoke, and indeed, in his own words, he now has casualized the system because he talks about crystallization and embellishment of our reputation. That's what he was saying. How do you embellish judicial reputation? You don't. Because the judiciary should conserve its authority and dignity with a lot of rigor and deliberation. We don't need to embellish it. It speaks for itself. But it can no longer do so, and therefore the Chief Justice is using a public forum to invite us to embellish their reputation. Why is he doing so? He has appointed his son a judge. He has appointed his sister-in-law a judge. He is going to Shein to get the auditor from his family to the NJC. Now, with all due respect, say whatever you will, my brother. A Chief Justice whose son is a judge and whose son is not performing will not be disciplined. A Chief Justice whose daughter-in-law is a judge and whose daughter-in-law is not performing will not be disciplined. A President of the Court of Appeal whose daughter has just been moved from Plateau State on a new appointment to the High Court of the Federal Capital Territory will not discipline their daughter. If you cannot discipline your own children because you did not comply with the rules, how are you going to discipline other people's children and husbands and wives? This is the problem.
But where do we go from here, Prof? I mean, we saw what
Let me finish, sir.
Yeah, we saw what.
Finish.
All right. Right.
Under this current Chief Justice, the judiciary has destroyed its own credibility. And I will name him. Olukayode Ariwola needs to be held accountable for what is happening under his watch.
Prof, we saw what the NJC did to some judges which petitions are against them. And yes, the elevation have been barred or suspended. But you look at it, where do we go from here? The NJC said they are trying their best. And the Chief Justice of Nigeria says, okay, now this is what should be, this is the way forward. In your own mind, how do we read the judiciary of corruption, of malfeasance, of any kind of dirty arrangement that will give our society the kind of confidence that it requires in its judiciary?
So let me tell you a story. In 1989, and I'm trying to answer this question, and there are two questions that are posed. In 1989, there was a Justice of Appeal in Port Harcourt. His name was Aloysius Katsina Alu. Late now, may the heavens be kind to his soul. And there was a petition brought against him before what was then known as the Advisory Judicial Committee, AJC, which really played the role then that the NJC plays now. And the AJC actually certified that petition as credible. And you know what they did? They said he was not to be elevated again. He would finish his career in the Court of Appeal. 20 years later, to complete the story, that man who was supposed to finish his career in the Court of Appeal became Chief Justice of Nigeria. These non-elevation things have been done before. They never worked. That is worse than a slap on the wrist. Okay? And speaking about a slap on the wrist, second point, one of the so-called disciplinary measures announced by the NJC last Friday was against a judge of the Yobe State High Court who issued a warrant of possession without a judgment, without an underlying judgment. That really is burglary. It is, at the minimum, theft. So a judge decides to issue a warrant to collect somebody else's property with no judgment underlying it. That is a crime. Do you know what the NJC did? They said they were going to write a love letter to this woman to warn her not to do it again. If you did that kind of thing, Shemu, you'll be in jail, either as a pretrial detainee or a convict. A judge does it, and this man who is addressing us this evening or today does what? Says they should write to caution the person. Another of the cases they announced was a judge in Delta State, I believe, who wasted 7 years after address without issuing a judgment. They also said, I believe, they were going to issue a warning and he will not be promoted for another 2 years. That is destroying the system of discipline and accountability in the judiciary. You cannot tell me, and you cannot tell any reasonable Nigerian, that a judge who abuses their power for the purpose of stealing other people's property under coloration of the rule of law, manifestly should be written and cautioned. The person does not have any business being a judge. But because this Chief Justice has wasted the authority of the judiciary, he cannot run a disciplinary system that works. That is the problem. So all of those announcements on discipline they made last Friday absolutely make my point that the current Chief Justice lacks the authority to say anything credible on discipline and accountability in the judiciary.
Well, those are deep there, and so much to sink in. But thank you so much, Professor Chidi Odinkalu, a former chairman of the National Human Rights Commission. Thank you so much indeed for your thoughts there.
You're welcome, my brother.
I appreciate it.
Good evening.